We now continue with shared value tourism, how communities, investors, and local authorities shape sustainability tourism. Please join me in welcoming our speakers.
Hi, everyone. It's me again. Thank you very much for sticking around and hearing the continuation of a conversation around tourism and how it impacts communities and long-term development. As we've discussed on the last panel, tourism is one of the key drivers and has been in particular for the Caribbean region. But the expectations have been evolving. And I know Sophia did mention that this is a slightly overused term, but the consumer is now looking for a more authentic, experiential experience when they come to the region. Investors are looking still at their long-term returns. Governments want to ensure the sustainability of the industry, and communities want to know that they have their livelihoods protected and, importantly, the environments that they live. It's a privilege to be joined by Kirsten McCarthy from the Sandals Group. I'll ask Kirsten to give a brief background to herself, and if you can please share, what does sustainable development mean to you?
Sure, and I feel honoured to have the stage all to myself with you, Isabel. So it's a privilege to be here in Barbados. My name's Kirsten McCarthy, and I'm the Corporate Director for Sandals Resorts International. I like working for a brand, the Sandals, because I rarely have to introduce who they are, but I will say that we're a luxury, all-inclusive hotel group. We're based across 9 islands, 20 resorts, and we're growing, which will be very important as part of our conversation today. You may tell from my accent, I'm not Jamaican, although I've been in Jamaica for 3 years now, and I've absolutely love it. I'm from England originally. Prior to moving to Jamaica to work for Sandals, my background was working in a building materials sector, decarbonisation, specifically around cement and building materials. So bringing a lot of knowledge from that sector into our new build and new development is certainly helping us grow more sustainably. So what does sustainable development mean to us as Sandals? Well, really it's about viewing the natural environment and our communities as an asset. Anyone can build a luxury resort, a big, great hotel, and they are amazing, and with all the features that they have. But what really attracts people to the region is what's there in terms of the natural environment, the beauty of, take Jamaica for an example, we have obviously the beaches, the sand, where everyone comes to vacation, but also the mountains, the region, the rivers, etc., and all of the biodiversity. So our view and approach is that we must be custodians of that natural environment, quite simply to protect our tourism product, because without this pristine natural environment, what do we have?
No, that's great. And I think, for us at IDB, sustainability, as I mentioned before, it's so ingrained in everything that we do, but the private sector and investors are becoming increasingly more aware, as we discussed on the last panel, the importance of building in sustainability and ESG into not only their underwriting, but in everything that they do. So Kirsten, I know Sandals have a very comprehensive strategy. I think it would be very helpful if you could just share with us how you've approached it since you joined and any lessons learned.
Sure. I was nodding a lot on the earlier panel because a lot of the panelists were saying all the things that we've undertaken over the last 2.5 years since I joined Sandals. I should say prior to me joining, we have an amazing foundation, and each of our resorts work extremely well with our local communities, and we've always put our people at the heart of all that we do. But what we didn't necessarily have was a formal framework and a joined up approach that can be replicated across our entire group. It was pretty fragmented, doing wonderful things at different areas. So maybe if I take you back to the beginning of how we started to develop the strategy that we have, because there's some important messages within there in terms of how we can make a success of our strategy. And that was firstly to undertake a materiality assessment. So that is for us to understand our impact as a group. So all the numbers are there. What's our carbon footprint? How much water we're consuming, etc. So we did all of the impact assessment. But really importantly, is what we needed to understand was what is material, what's of material impact to stakeholders. And stakeholders would be within the organisation and also external to the organisation. So as part of the starting process of the strategy and to help contribute to that buy-in, we invited over 800 team members from the Sandals team. We held mini conferences, and we also brought along the University of West Indies, who are fantastic in terms of a knowledge hub of climate impacts. And we presented to a group, but we also held workshops to get our team members to understand the impact of what we do and how we can work together to find the solutions. Because I came in from the UK, I don't have all of the answers. The answers are within the company. So bringing everyone together to understand what the impacts are and then prioritise the solutions was fundamental into shaping our strategy, because it must be deliverable. We got very strong and aspirational goals, but ultimately everyone, it's like a bit like health and safety, everyone has a responsibility and a part to play. So we did that, and then also externally, we went out to over 1,000 external stakeholders, including other hotel groups. We went out to local government bodies, the environmental agencies, and this is across all of the islands, so bear in mind we're 9 islands, we have a presence. So we did a very extensive stakeholder engagement approach, again, to rank and identify from an external perspective what are the priorities. Then we had all of this information that we had to process and go through as a board to decide where can we have the greatest impact, what are the things we can do quite simply and get those into the strategy, what some of the more challenging items but are of fundamental importance, so they need to be in the strategy. So we went through this process, and we do now have a very strong strategy. Although it has its own detail, it doesn't just sit on a shelf, it's embedded within the company. And I can share more about that if you like.
No, that's really helpful. I think the approach that you've taken is clearly very thoughtful and has incorporated so many stakeholders. And I think within that context, it would be helpful to understand how you go about prioritizing projects. And maybe if you could give us some examples of the ones that have really added the most value.
Yeah, sure. So by understanding the climate impacts and the locations and where our resorts are present will help us prioritise what we need to address. So I'll go into a specific area. I'll give you, again, the island of Jamaica. We have 2 resorts in Negril. And Negril, as a region, or a Westmoreland region, has very, they have water shortages, so water is a very tight resource for that particular community. So how we prioritise our approach is we have a broad commitment across the group to reduce our water consumption by 30% by 2030. But when we go into the detail in which resort has the biggest risk factor, we talk about Negril. That's how we prioritise our investment into water reclamation projects in Negril, for example. So we go right down into the sort of depth of individual resort action plans, and then by doing them on an individual basis, we can address the local priorities. So we have the broad commitment, but it's not only until you get into the local island when you need to really understand the detail and what's at risk.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting when you were saying about how you're building in these resort kind of priorities, but the extension of that is so important to the communities that surround. If you can maybe talk a little bit more about the support you give to maybe SMEs, which from a large perspective are underrepresented or underserved. So it'd be good to know what work Sandal's doing, either directly or through the foundation, to help in that area.
I think this is one of the things I'm most proud of, and our support to local businesses came long before I came to Jamaica. Being Jamaican owned as an organisation, head office is based in Jamaica, but obviously we're across all of the 9 islands. Supporting local businesses across that group is an absolute priority. We've developed the linkages with those local communities to support businesses. So just to give you a couple of practical examples, on each of our resorts, we have now built a dedicated resort, trying to think of the right word to describe it, like an artisan village. So little shops, little shops where our local artisans come to the resort and then they sell their wares directly to our guests. So obviously we have a lovely resort shop which has got plenty of things available, but we want to share that investment directly with the local community by bringing them into the resort. So that's one sort of small example, but much bigger than that is the work that we do to build the supply chain. And within Jamaica, overall we have a target of 70% local procurement across the group. But in Jamaica, because it's bigger, we achieve in that way over 70%. But some of the other islands is more difficult. So what we're doing is, I'll just give you an example in St. Vincent, and I've got to shout out to some people in the room that I can see that helped us set up a program, the Pan American Development Foundation, where we work with the local fisher folk in St. Vincent, and we are helping them build the landing site and have all the training so they can supply directly their seafood to Sandals Resort. It's fresher, it's travelled less miles, it supports the local community, it just makes sense. What we have to do is replicate that model now, so we're doing the same thing in Jamaica, and we're actually having come past the fishing market here in Barbados. I was very impressed with the setup, so I'll be visiting there on Friday to check it out in more detail, because we should be buying local seafood here and consuming that on our resort, and bringing that to our guests is just win-win-win all around.
So one of the things we were discussing on the last panel is how are you measuring a lot of the successes that you're doing? And if you can just help us, is it quantified, or are you looking at a return per investment? And how does that fit in, to your broader strategy?
Yes, so historically we've not really looked at it as a return on investment. It's just something that we've to do the right thing, and that's just been our approach. But we have just recently started to break it down, because we've just developing some technology that allows us to quantify it more financially in terms of our impact, but we're not quite there yet. What we do is we can measure every dollar that we spend, and we can categorise it by where that's spent. So we can very easily understand where we're spending our money. What we don't necessarily capture at the moment is by investing such and such, what's that return on investment. But our project with the local fisher folk in St. Vincent, working also with the Sandals Foundation to support some of the investment that's required, and the local government there, we will be able to have our first case study where we can demonstrate the return on investment.
And you mentioned something around technology, and you gave me a brilliant example when we spoke earlier. But if you can maybe talk through the benefits of how technology can help inform your decision making and ultimately extend into the benefits to the broader community.
Yeah, so technology is obviously really important to what we do, and having the right systems to present the data that in a more efficient way. Historically, to understand what a carbon footprint was, you'd have literally put a stick in a diesel bucket, measure how much, estimate the amount of fuel you've consumed, and then rely on some paper to do all of that. So technology is fundamental. So we've rolled out smart metering across all of our resorts. So we know where we're using our water, we know where we're using our energy, and we are investing in AI solutions through building management systems. So actually here in Barbados, we are one of our buildings that we're refurbishing currently will be of the highest specification in terms of energy management system, so that we can know when air conditioning is left on unnecessarily. It will send an alert via SMS. You can come and then address it then, all via computer and software. Again, that's going to become a case study for future resorts. So if you measure the impact, we can measure the investment. We say this one makes sense. Let's roll it out. And that's the beauty we have within a group. Another pilot that we're doing, and this is how we tend to get the investment required, is to pilot one example of a technology, proof of concept. We have a standard way of working now in terms of a template to prove the concept, prove that it works. If it works, then we have the ability as a group to just replicate that across all resorts. So that comes as a benefit with our buying power, etc. The one example I'd like to talk that we're piloting in Sandals Duns River property in Jamaica is AI technology again, which is focusing on food waste. So as a general rule, all of our resorts donate any food waste to local farmers. That happens, the farmers come and collect the waste at the end of every day, and then that goes into pig feed ultimately. But what we want to do is not produce waste in the first place if we can. So we are having a technology, sounds really simple, and I'll explain it simply, is a digital camera above our waste bins and a scale at the bottom. And the waste bin that we have is the same as we already had. Scrape the waste in there, and using the high pixelated digital camera, it can detect exactly what's being thrown into the bin and what's wasted. So then we can challenge our food and beverage team to say, maybe we're serving too many French fries at lunchtime because 50% of them are coming back, or this recipe is not tasting so good because people are sending it back. So we can use that technology to help us address things like waste.
You talk about leveraging technology, but also leveraging the relationship with academia, which Donnell mentioned on the earlier panel as being so important. Can you talk about how Sandals leverages relationships with governments and the private sector in terms of collaboration to better serve the communities?
Yes, of course. And again, I'd like to give some examples. In terms of working with the local academia, the University of the West Indies have got some serious experts that are represented on at the United Nations. They present all the evidence on climate change. So I was blown away by the resources that we have on the island and all of the data that we do have in terms of impact. So it's really important that we talk to those institutes, partner with those institutes to get that information to help us adapt to the future impacts and the scenarios that are there and present. How we work with local government is another example, is we want to invest in mangrove and seagrass into the natural ecosystem, and we decided as a group, where can we plant some mangroves? Well, we don't know. We can do hospitality, but we don't know where the best place to place the mangroves are. But we want to invest. So working with the local environmental agencies to understand where the need is, and then they just tell us and we invest, and it's as simple as that. So these relationships are critical for us to achieving our strategy.
I think collaboration is so important, and Sophia mentioned on the last panel the importance of, or the benefit that IDB can bring, just given that we have a public sector side, a private sector side, we have IDB Lab, and really it's the collaboration amongst us that helps us best partner with our clients and ensures that they have access to all of those resources. And so I think it's really interesting when you're talking about doing that in really what is public-private partnership in its most kind of organic and an authentic way. So I think, what I found was really interesting when you shared how you've approached and the thoughtfulness towards the strategy and coming from the UK and your background, were there any specific challenges that you faced in the region in implementing this strategy that others in the room can maybe benefit from your learnings?
Yes, I think just the one thing for me that was I guess a challenge, but I was quite surprised that it was a challenge, was the understanding that climate change is real and that we on a very regular basis feel the impacts, and that hasn't been necessarily quantified. So one of the exercises I did do is work with our cost control team to say, in the last 5 years, what have you spent on storm-related damages in repairing our property? What have we spent on beach rehabilitation? And then we started to actually look and say, well, yeah, this is because of the impact of climate change. What's our numbers like for scuba diving? It's well known that we've got a lot of coral death around the Caribbean region, but Jamaica in particular, diving is reduced year on year because of the coral bleaching that's happened around that island. So these are all real impacts, but what wasn't necessarily understood was actually quantifying the events with the impacts of climate change. I think, and I would like to pause for a moment to think about obviously the families that are still impacted from a Category 5 hurricane, Hurricane Melissa, that devastated Jamaica just recently. And I hate to use it as an example, but that is a real life example of climate change happening. We've lost communities, and I was there and experienced it myself, and it was an awful experience, and we're still bouncing back from that. But from a just pure practical business point of view, we still have 3 resorts closed in Jamaica, our south coast, and 2 on our north coast are still closed as a result of the hurricane. So that's a very stark reality and a wake-up call of what the future impacts are. And when we rebuild, we're building back better. And we're building a new property up in the north of Barbados, which I'm going to visit tomorrow afternoon. And we're working with the design team in the earliest possible stages to integrate resilience into that design. And that's not just from the building perspective and operational elements, but it's also, what do our guests want? And I can't recall the name of the study, but it was based on, there was a tourism study in Cuba, and they did a time study of guests and how they do their thing on their vacation at an all-inclusive resort. And it came back that at certain points of the day, what our guests want is shade from the sun. It's hotter. So when we're building back better, we're building also more shading into our resorts, more natural shading as well into our resorts too.
And you mentioned something really important, and that was the Category 5 hurricane that hit Jamaica and elsewhere in the region, and the work that you're doing to rebuild resiliency. But there was also a huge human side in the communities that you mentioned.
Yes.
And it may be worth just mentioning a little bit of Sandal's response in supporting those communities.
Of course. And I was completely blown away by the Sandals team and how they responded to the hurricane. And we've recently had a staff survey, and I put my feedback verbatim in there because it was people first. Genuinely, we established a number of work streams responding to the impact of the hurricane, and it was people, and that includes our community as well as our employees first. So that was the first work stream that was established to identify what our employees need, and I was part of that myself, and I had to fill out a form to say what's the state of my home currently. I have a power? Have I got electricity? This was for every single team member. Do I need building materials? And we also established local technology centres with Starlink. I think we might have bought all of the Starlinks that were available, so we could establish those in communities. So not just for team members, it's for communities to be able to communicate, with loved ones after the hurricane hit. And importantly, even though our resorts are still closed, all of our staff, 100% of our staff are being paid their salary whilst it's closed, because obviously it's impacting everyone bad enough. We set up satellite laundrettes. We were doing people's laundries. We gave our hangar at the airport to the ambulance team to dedicate for rescue. We gave rooms to overseas volunteers. So the whole host of things that we did for the community that we don't necessarily shout about because it's just what we do.
No, that's incredible. And we are almost out of time. I can't believe how quickly 30 minutes goes by. But before we go, Kristen, I think the last question I would ask is, if you think about all the work that you're doing and all the plans that you have, 10 years from now, if we were sat here, what would a success story in sustainable tourism look like to you?
Oh, 10 years from now. I'd like to say it was sooner, actually, but I know how long things take. So a few things, certainly before 10 years from now, but I'd like to see 0 single-use plastics in operation across all of the islands, because you can see that waste ending up in the oceans, and it has a devastating effect. I would like to see resilience built into more properties. I'd like to see renewable energy targets being implemented by the energy sector on the islands. We're obviously burning a lot of fossil fuels on island to produce electricity. I'd like to see that greener in 10 years' time. I'd like to see the conversion factors at least half. I might be being optimistic here, but I've got a long list. But fundamentally, I'd like to see the people still enjoying themselves, enjoying the natural environment, enjoying their vacations, experiencing the hospitality that is provided by this amazing region, by all of the people that are here and the culture that it has to offer, continuing to operate with the natural beauty improved.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and thank you all for joining us today, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.